Good evening. I'd like to call the Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023 Planning Commission meeting to order. Our first order of business is public comments. Do we have anyone signed up or online?
Yes, we have someone in person.
Okay. Oh, that means I have to get out my. Just a moment, and I will be ready for you. Okay. We welcome our community members to the Planning Commission's meeting. In this forum, the Planning Commission does not engage or dialogue with the public. The primary role of the Planning Commission is to listen. We will hear from our on-site guests, followed by any virtual guests. If you are online, please raise your hand. Now, if you wish to speak, all guests must address comments to the chair and the city planning commissioners. The clerk will acknowledge your request and call your name when it is your turn. Your time will start when we confirm that we can hear you or that the microphone can hear you. Due to time constraints and to provide fair time to all community members, we must limit each speaker to 3 minutes. We will not split your time with others or reset your time. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. Screen sharing is not allowed. You can submit materials to the Planning Commission or clerk in advance. Materials submitted after the meeting will be provided to the commission for the next meeting. Please do not comment about pending development projects on which the Planning Commission or the City Council will make future decisions, as those are quasi-judicial matters, and planning commissioners and council members must limit their communication about such matters. This meeting is being recorded, and we appreciate you for taking the time to express your comments. Our first person, please.
Elizabeth Mooney can take the mic.
Thank you. Elizabeth Mooney, resident in Kenmore since 1995. I've watched the city incorporate, been on the Shoreline Committee with Mike Vanderland. Thank you. And I'm proud to be president of a nonprofit that emerged here in Kenmore, PERC, People for Environmentally Responsible Kenmore, whose mentor is the Lake Forest Park Stewardship Foundation, where I met Dwight Thompson. And I'm just really happy that I'm part of the city. And last night, I just want to say one of the most exciting city councils, thanks to Richard Sawyer over there, giving a presentation with Osborne, I think is the consultant. And it's all about culverts being replaced. And it's just a strong indicator to me that our city is changing for the better. That has to do with clean air, clean water, salmon, stream restoration, and all of that is good for our economy. So I'm here to support at this stage what you're working on. And I want to thank you, first of all, for all the hard work and all the reading and all the meetings. It takes a lot. And I know, Mike, you've been there for so many years. Thank you for serving. I'm here to support a strong climate element. I think the council will need to actually fund this work. I praise you all for including lots of environmental work in the climate element. And the city and our nonprofits can support this, need to be examples and lead by example. So if it turns out that we can start composting over at the hangar or in our buildings, our city buildings, you know, I'm here to say I'll help out. The city can lead by example. We can all unite in the common effort to support you in the strong climate element. Because saving the trees, I know Lake Forest Park saves more trees, but I'm here to help us kind of bond together on that one. Dwight, I've talked to you a bit about that, and I want to get more of our people working on saving every tree we can and planting more and wetlands. And all of this is good for our economy. As we become the healthy city with a healthy shoreline, healthy uplands, it's just going to be like Kenmore is a leader for our nation and our world. Thank you. Hang in there. I'm going to go walk the trails right now with my husband who has a cold, and that's why he's not in here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate it. I just want everyone to know that the other people on the commission are just as strong with regard to have done what people have done in the city for the environment.
We do have one online public comment too.
Okay, and let's go ahead.
Dakota Rash, you may speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. Well, thank you all for the time this evening. My name is Dakota Rash. I am a resident of Lake Forest Park. You all are considering a first draft for a comprehensive plan update to the climate element. So guess what I'm going to talk about? I want to start off by acknowledging something that I find troubling. Overall, I think there are a lot of really great things in this plan. I especially want to make a shout out to CA 10.1.2 that talks about gathering youth input. I think that's fantastic. But I also note at the beginning of this draft, a sentence that, well, a paragraph that gives me some issues. The Kenmore Climate Action Plan leverages existing city planning efforts and actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, et cetera, et cetera. Go on. Final sentence. The strategies and actions in the CAP are rooted in the latest climate science, aligned with regional targets and tailored to specific Kenmore community needs and priorities. I find disjunction there because the latest science tells us that net carbon zero by 2050 is a global goal. So it's developed nations' responsibilities to get there faster. A goal of 50% by 2030 is not enough. So I want to tie that down to objective 4.2, especially policy CA 4.2.3, which kind of implies that you all might be considering a faster deadline. And I would absolutely encourage that. That is necessary to stave off the worst of the climate crisis. Generally, I also want to pique your all's interest in language and order of goals and policies throughout this draft. I find it troubling how we still use words like in goal 4, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from building. I understand that that might be indeed what we do reduce them, but why is our goal only to reduce? Isn't the global goal to eliminate? Why are we worried about saying eliminate? Why are we milk toasting this to reduce? I also want to highlight why do we make the softer goals and the first policies? So why is our first policy incorporating an incentive, objective 4.1, where our second policy, objective 4.2, is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by transitioning to renewable energy? I think that should be first. I think we should take a hard line that we are transitioning to renewable clean energy on a timeline that global scientific consensus tells us we need to do in order to stave off the worst of this possible mass extinction level event. So I would just encourage you all to take that kind of view when you're looking at this, to really be bold about what we need to do and be honest about what we need to do. We don't just need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We need to eliminate them, and we can and will do that. But the first step in doing so is being honest about that bold step. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the?
That is all.
Okay, great. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes for April 18th, 2023. Is there any discussion? Okay. Hearing no discussion, if there's no objection, the minutes are adopted by unanimous consent. So that brings us to the major work of tonight. So I guess our staff will be coming up. Please go ahead.
Good evening, commissioners. All right, thank you for having us back again. So let me set the stage for this evening. All right, we are continuing our presentation that began at Planning Commission's April 18th meeting, where we started presenting the draft climate action element to Planning Commission and receiving your feedback and direction. And we are presenting this material with our consultant from Cascadia Consulting Group, Nicole Gutierrez, and she's joining us again this evening. Thank you, Nicole. And I think you did the sound check and everything all right, so you can hear everything. Great. So this evening, we want to just pick up where we left off on April 18th. We had made it to goal 5 in the climate action element. And then again, just to remind Planning Commission kind of the process moving forward, we hope to complete the review of the draft this evening with you all. And then, and we aren't presenting anything new this evening that was provided to us on April 18th. We're just continuing on. We won't be, we'll be coming back on May 16th to present the redlined and marked up draft, incorporating all of your comments and direction for you to provide us feedback on whether or not we got your direction correctly and any other additional comments you may have at that time. And then hopefully on June 6th, we'll be in a position where we can hold the public hearing for the draft climate action element. And then on June 20th, we hope to receive Planning Commission's recommendation to City Council to adopt it.
Richard, a question before you move on.
Yeah.
On the process, thank you for this letter. I really appreciate the calendar. We're going to be going to into the public hearing on the 6th. Are we going to be able to see that final, which includes the revisions and the incorporation of the second draft, before we get to the public hearing? I would assume we need to see that probably at least a week before the 6th.
Yes, well, we need to post, we will post the final draft for Planning Commission, as well as there's the notification requirements for the public hearing. So like, is it 10 days? I don't remember off the top of my head, 7 days. So yeah, well, that will all be posted prior to the meeting.
Great, and that's on the city's website?
On the city's website, and it will, I imagine Shannon will be providing that directly to you as well.
Okay, so that brings a procedural point with regard to the Planning Commission itself. So are you saying that we, as the Planning Commission, are not going to see the version, red line version, before it goes to hearing?
Yeah, so we'll meet May 16th and to review the first red line version. And then any additional, we'll confirm everything. It looks good. If there are any other comments that Planning Commission would like to make, we could make those after the May 16th meeting. And then that everything from that meeting will be posted with a final draft prior to the June 6th meeting that will include the public hearing.
So what I'm concerned about is that we have a consistent majority here that are feeling good about that draft going to public hearing. And I'm trying to figure out how to make that happen. I'm not questioning your integrity, but we do have a public process that requires the Planning Commission to view before it goes to hearing, because if there's major changes after the hearing, we have to have another hearing. And so I'm just trying to stay away from a second hearing. So maybe some of us will think, I will think about that as we go through tonight and figure out what and then several others I'm sure will have ideas about that. So let's hit it.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, this is our proposed schedule. Obviously, we can pivot and adjust if we need. So, but this was, you know, I worked with Debbie before leaving, and so this was kind of that hopeful, you know, that everything's going well.
Okay.
So I would remind that this project is being funded by Washington State Department of Commerce grant. And so their deadline is the end of June. So that's why we do have this kind of accelerated deadline. So
Is what I missed that 8th of June?
so June 30th is.
Oh, June
that's
30th.
We need
Okay,
to complete the project by June 30th for
Okay, thank you.
to meet the requirements of our grant. Yeah.
Didn't hear that clearly. I should look at the closed caption and then we'll figure it out.
Commissioner, so, you know, we did like Richard stated, we clarified the timeline for the planning commission as far as reviewing the documentation. So the clerk will be submitting a notice of public hearing that will take place on the 22nd or the 23rd, whichever date the clerk decides to do that. And then we, at that point, the following week, we would be submitting documentation for review for the public hearing. Might be mistaken.
It would seem that,
Yeah, so we'll be submitting documentation on the 30th for the commission to review ahead of the hearing.
why
Does
don't
that
we,
clarify
uh,
the timeline?
it provides information so that I'm sure that some of us are thinking about it. So we're good.
Okay.
So let's move ahead.
Quick question. This is Commissioner Cadre. I know there's a deadline. I think you said June 8th. I know these grants typically they have deadlines, but there's also an opportunity to ask for some more time. Is there any possible way we potentially could ask for more time if we need it? Because I do think this is a very, very important issue and something that we need to make sure that, in my opinion, is as perfect as it can be. And so is it possible for us to be able to get more time if need be? I'm not saying that we will be asking for more time, but is part of the grant conditions, you know, in the legal world, we ask for a continuance, but is this something that we could ask for more time to kind of, you know, think more about and make the required changes that we need to make? Hopefully that question makes sense, but
I understand the question, but unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you. I can't really speak on behalf of Commerce. I'm not sure.
Sure.
But if it does come to that, of course, we're happy to ask. I guess I would just, you know, let's keep moving forward, and then we can cross that bridge if we need to.
Sure.
We'll see how tonight goes in the following meeting.
thank you.
Well, the other option, everyone's going to cover their ears, but the other option is for us to have a special meeting just to get this done. So we all feel comfortable with this going to public hearing, because after public hearing, typically our work has very little amendments. And we'd like to keep it that way. Not because we're not listening to the public, but usually the public is pretty satisfied with what we've tried to do based on input. But anyway, I think I think we're all on the same page here, and let's move on and try to get this done, which is really what you want. Right?
Yeah, that sounds
Okay.
good. Let's do it. So I will hand it over to Nicole, and who can pick up where we left off in goal 5.
That sounds great. So, sorry. Excuse me. At the last meeting, I think, like Richard said, we left off on goal 5. I was sharing my screen, so I think I'll do that again so everyone can follow along as we incorporate edits. Okay, looks like the correct screen is sharing. And I did have to jump off a little bit early of at the last meeting. I think maybe you had 10 minutes more conversation. So this is where where I left off, and we can pick up again on goal 5.
Yeah, I don't think we made it any further after you left,
Okay.
Nicole. We can just pick it right up there.
Great.
Okay, so if we're done with goal 5, I don't see any objections, then let's go to goal 6.
Nathan, you can go first.
Oh, there I see him. Yes, Nathan.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Oh,
Okay.
yes, we can hear you just fine.
So I'll start off with 6.1. I just had a comment about the wording there that said prevent residential and commercial waste from being sent to landfills. Now, prevent, to me, it struck me as very immediate and all-encompassing. I don't know if maybe there's a better word, say transition to at some point reach a point in which residential and commercial waste is not being sent to landfills, or let's see, or encourage the use of alternative waste recycling programs, or something like that. I guess how I read it was, once we pass this, it sounds like everything's sort of prevented. So maybe there's a better word that talks about this long-term planning approach of transitioning to that state when we're able to get there, or talk about that process.
Further discussion? Commissioner Benaziski.
I hear that concern, Nathan, and I think it's consistent with how we've discussed other policies. And maybe this may be something this staff can advise on, but I actually like that we're taking a strong stance on this. I like it feels like we're not hedging, or we're not leaving ourselves any wiggle room. So I like the commitment that is prevent. If we use that strong language, does that put the city in a compromised place after this is passed as part of our element in the comprehensive plan?
Anyone else?
Well, that was a question for, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Richard or Sammy, about what position that puts the city in if we're using such strong language.
Commissioner Quadri.
Yeah, and just to add to that, kind of going back to what Mr. Dakota Rush had said in the public comment, when I was reading through this, just goal number 6, the goal in itself, it says reduce negative environmental impacts and GHG emissions, so on and so forth. Why can't we not put eliminate instead of reduce negative environmental impacts? And then as far as the GHG, we can say and reduce GHG emissions, because obviously that's a bit harder. But I do think that stronger language is needed, and something that I think the council should even consider as well. If it's too strong for the council, then I think it's something that they should discuss. But I think we should, under goal number 6, say eliminate negative environmental impact instead of reduce. I think that would be more powerful as opposed to just reduce. That's just something that I would recommend at this point.
Any further discussion on his recommendation? All those in favor say aye. What?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, good. There's no no's, so that changed from reduce to eliminate.
Eliminate.
Did I get that right?
That's correct. Yeah, eliminate.
Commissioner Benaziski.
Is there still space for us to hear from staff about whether they think using strong language will compromise us? I prefer the strong language myself, and I know we've discussed it in the past. I think I remember it particularly when we were talking about the effects of gentrification downtown and wanting to protect people from being displaced. I think the whole planning commission was trying to insert some pretty strong language about preventing that, and we were steered away from it. So I'm just wondering, in the context of this conversation, what staff's position or view on strong language is. I like it, and it's here, so you put it in there for a reason, but I would love some kind of maybe background from you on that.
Well, I think that what we can do is take this feedback. I don't know if I have an answer right away. I think that with, our direction, we would want to use as strong language as we can. So we'll take this and kind of follow up, and then in the red lines, if it's something after we kind of discuss a little further, we can come back and either incorporate that, or if we have maybe some alternate suggestions, we can provide that with some explanation of why.
Well,
So
with-
Dwight, were you asking
Well-
us to vote on Saad's recommendation in goal 6 and not on Nathan's recommendation in objective 6.1? Just for
To
clarification for
prevent-
me.
Nathan, state your motion or your position on what you want, please.
Well, it was just a suggestion. Do you want me to formally motion for that, Chair Thompson? Or are we going to wait for Richard to come back with more feedback?
Well, it depends on how strongly you feel about it. Commissioner Lucas.
I'm fine having Richard come back and, discussing this a little bit more if he, I don't know, checks in with others, whoever may be a good source or relevant source when it comes to language. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up, that this was something that had caught my eye.
Okay, we'll leave it at that then.
Can I make,
Commissioner Vanderling?
Thank you. I'll venture an addition to Nathan's query, and he can reject it if he likes. I like the idea of having you think about this and come back. I'm particularly interested in, as we look at creating a more rigid or expansive goals for ourselves. What does that do when we come down to the implementation steps? We move from, for instance, reduce to eliminate. That's going to take some pretty severe and comprehensive implementation to make that happen. Are we required to put that into the plan? How we would go from reduce to eliminate? What does that do to our plan when we come down to the implementation steps? What I'm concerned about here in particular is if we come up with some aggressive, and I support them, goals, but then we have some rather wimpy implementation because we just don't know how to do that. Plus 90% of the implementation is going to happen outside, or is going to be contingent on actions outside of our own control. What's the credibility left in our plan if we end up with that? So I don't have an answer to that. I'm going to leave it back to you, Richard, to think through, but because you guys are the ones who are going to have to write the implementation steps when we get down to that point of this. So I'd like to hear more about that.
Commissioner.
That's the kind of discussions I think we'll need to have, because I mean, just already, just like eliminate, I mean, how can you even exist with absolutely zero? I mean, you could have the cleanest, greenest, everything, but you still are producing something. So that's, I don't know. I think we'll have to look at that language and chat with Debbie too when she gets back, and especially kind of in the planning context, what the kind of language impacts are.
And maybe we look at more objective goals that may be more aggressive than, but if we're clearer about that, rather than moving all the way to a zero factor, that may be something that's a little more realistic. And then we can measure and look forward to when we come back in a few years and relook at this again. How did we do? I think we do need to have objective measures in order to be able to understand how effective we've been, and also to be able to look at those implementation steps, say, this will move us to this goal. It'll be meaningful, it'll be substantial, where other implementation steps we could take might look good, and they might be valuable themselves, but they're not going to move the needle enough to get us to zero.
Commissioner Quadri.
thank you. Just this might be a little annoying, but I guess my purpose here today is to try to get a little more aggressive with this plan. And I'm looking at 6.1.1, and it says participate in a regional strategy. And I was just going to suggest and make a motion to maybe say actively engage in a regional strategy or actively participate in a regional strategy. I mean, I think the whole active, have Kenmore be active in this strategy is very important. So my motion, I guess, today is to change just participate in a regional strategy to actively engage in a regional strategy through the adopted 2019 King County Comprehensive Solid Waste. This is 6.11 is what I'm referring to. So that's my motion today.
Thank you, and it's been seconded. Commissioner Benaziski, did you want to say something before we discuss this particular motion? You had your hand up.
I did, thank you, Chair Thompson. I think I will hold until after this discussion. I'll circle back around. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on changing that first word to actively engage? Hearing no discussion, the motion is adopted. Okay, so Commissioner Benaziski, you're next up.
Thank you. So I'm circling back around to the goal and the idea of reducing negative environmental impacts. And I understand, like, and just taking that statement alone out of context, we are always going to have an environmental impact. But I think in the context of the entire goal, when I read it, reducing negative environmental impacts and well, it's been modified, but I'm reading it as it is, and GHG emissions it's associated with the consumption of goods, materials, and waste practices. So in that context, I believe that we can eliminate negative environmental impacts by balancing the negative impacts that we have with positive impacts that we have. This reminds me of the conversation that we had I think it was in, I can't remember which element it was in, but about moving toward a concept of net ecological gain instead of no net loss of ecological function. So on balance, we can create more positive than negative if we reframe things that way. So I'm just adding to the discussion about that goal. I don't have an amendment for a change right now.
Is there any other discussion on goal 6? Commissioner Cadre.
Thank you. I'm looking at policy 6.1.3. It says targeted campaigns. I guess the question is, what kind of campaigns are we referring to? Are these marketing campaigns, community engagement campaigns? Can we possibly specify or let us know what campaigns these are? I think that would be beneficial for us to kind of specify exactly what kind of targeted campaigns we're talking about here. Can someone tell me what those campaigns are?
Yeah, the intention of this goal is to do like marketing and outreach to residents and commercial businesses so that they know what you can compost, what you can recycle. A lot of folks wish cycle, or they are putting things that shouldn't be composted in the compost, or they're composting or throwing away things that could be composted. So it's really like an educational campaign, I think, with communications. Yeah.
So I guess my motion today again is for policy 6.1.3, we add develop targeted educational campaigns. And that's what my motion is at this point.
I don't know. Commissioner Cadre, would you I read there, develop
targeted educational campaigns for composting and recycling material with highest GHG reduction impact is what my motion is, to add educational campaigns. Or if it's, I think you had said marketing and outreach programs, Nicole, is that what you said?
Correct.
So,
yeah.
so that, I think that would fall under educational campaign. So I would suggest that we put educational campaign to specify what kind of campaigns we're talking about.
Is there any further discussion on that? Hearing none, we'll make that change. Oh, Nathan, do you have your hand up? Commissioner Lutzis.
2 quick points. I'm going to jump back really quickly to 6.1 before we move on, and maybe this will help clarify things for Richard as well. With the word prevent sending waste to landfills, does that get us in trouble maybe with our contracts with Republic Services? If we adopt this and now it says we can't any longer send waste to Republic Services, I don't expect you to have an answer, but maybe just think about like if you keep that in the back of your head as before the next time we meet back on this one. That I think that's kind of where I'm a little uneasy about that wording. The second point I had is on 6.2. And Richard, I have a question for you on this one. It says or other date. Yeah, objective 6.2. I like this. I mean, I'm happy to reduce this as low as feasibly possible, as soon as possible. Richard, do you happen to know like why, or the consultants, why 2034 was picked, and what's the earliest feasible date we could actually maybe scale this back to?
I'll answer just why it's 2034. So some feedback we got was this is for a comprehensive plan update for 2024. So allow 10 years to enable this to be accomplished. That was the feedback we got. It's still, we can still change it. That was just one date we got in response.
I mean, I'm fine with 2029, but I also want to put it up to the commission if maybe somebody has another idea, or if Richard, maybe, I don't know if you had anything to add at all.
No, I mean, I think just like Nicole said, that date came from just our conversations with staff, but we're happy to take any feedback on a more aggressive date. On that second question, back to the first question, I was just going to add when we were just back on 613 about the campaigns. Another example that kind of came to mind was the council recently pledged to join the RE Plus program with King County, which has a strong, I think, educational and outreach component, but it's also going to be providing grants to try and incentivize the reduction of recycled materials and particularly organics and things. But I think it's not just educational. So my only point would be, I don't know if you want to restrict this to just educational campaigns, because these campaigns could include other things such as assistance for enforcement of recycling and composting. And then your question also with Republic. So the city is actually, it's the UTC that manages waste management in our city. So we don't directly, control who our providers are and whatnot, but we have all been having conversations together, Republic, King County, and the city, and I think everyone's on board on implementing these policies and goals. So, but again, I would just say that I don't know if you want to restrict that to just education, these campaigns could be more broad.
With that input, why we're going to redline the educational and then welcome your blue lining as you see that the policies and the programs would be better described. How about that? And then take it up at the next meeting.
Yeah,
Any
I'm okay.
objection
I'm
to
okay
that?
with that.
Oh, there he is. Okay, Commissioner Cadre.
Yeah, I have no objection to that. I think that makes a lot more sense. Thank you for that. With that new information that I just received.
Now, Commissioner Lutzis, I think there was another item that you mentioned that.
Just 6.2. Sorry, I think we're kind of jumping back and forth all over the place, and I don't think we got that matter resolved yet. I'm happy to open this up to discussion, but I guess I would make a motion to change this to 2029, open to friendly amendments.
Is there more discussion on the change from 2034? Want to Yes, Commissioner Benaziski.
I'm in favor of moving more aggressively on all of these things, and I also feel sensitive to capacity issues. So I would love for us to be aggressive, but then also remind our decision makers that they need to allocate more resources for more support to make these things happen more aggressively.
Further discussion.
Just Commissioner Cottery, 6.1.6 waste is misspelled. Just wanted to correct that mistake.
Okay.
Chair Thompson, I believe I have a motion presented. Should we stick with that first?
Yes. Did Commissioner Lutz just say that?
Yes, I'm sorry. I said, I
No,
made a
that's okay.
motion.
That's okay. For both of the two of you online, the closed captioning is on top of you. So like coming out of your mouths. So it's good. So when you speak, you know what's happening. All right. So there is a motion on the floor to change 2030 to 2029. And I normally just second that for motion for voting. So if there's no further discussion, so we'll put that to a vote. So all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Well, I think that's unanimous. So we're gonna, unless I heard two ayes on the Zoom, so we're gonna change that 2029. Okay, next item. Are there any other items from the commissioners on Commissioner Benaziski?
I have a question about policies 6.1.4 and 6.1.6. Are they, is the second sentence in 6.1.4 and the entirety of 6.1.6 saying the same things? Do we need them in both places? Do we need them only in one place?
Yes, I think those could be combined.
I prefer of course, the more aggressive language or I don't want to call it aggressive. I think I have a slight preference for the language in 6.1.6, but I'm open to discussion about that.
Nicole, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. We would work to combine these two and keep the more the stronger language.
Stronger. Thank you, Nicole. Stronger. I like that.
Do you have any comments, Richard, on that?
No, we can, we'll work on combining that. I think like Nicole said, we can probably simplify that into one. I think the main difference is the residential component of one, whereas the other focuses on commercial and multifamily. So,
Well, we'll let you do blue lining on that, okay?
yeah.
All right.
And relatedly, I have often desired that we would be composting at the hangar and at City Hall as a way to be leaders in the community ahead of it being mandated for other commercial establishments or restaurants. And I'm wondering if that's a desire that the city has to lead that way. And if so, if it could be part of a policy. And again, open to discussion from fellow commissioners and comments from staff.
I think, so it sounds like you could, are you suggesting that we add either to the existing policy that we're combining to include city-owned facilities, or perhaps a new policy where we specifically call out city facilities would mandate recycling and composting?
Yeah, I think I would love for it to happen in our city facilities earlier. If we're not, if it's going to take some time for us to get to mandating it for residential and commercial properties in the city, like if we can go ahead and take the first step as a city, I would love that. If it can all happen at one fell swoop too, that's fine. But I'm guessing that this is going to be a process which the city could probably get out ahead and lead on. So maybe I'm suggesting it could be either, or maybe a separate one if we can be leaders on it, if you think it'll take a while for us to get there with other properties.
Okay. I can work with Nicole on that, and we can come up with including city facilities.
I
And make a note of that, Nicole.
Yes, I have a note of that. The mandate composting in city facilities. Wanting Kenmore to be a leader.
Can't remember which House bill, but the implementation date's coming up where there are some of these requirements kicking in soon for any commercial sites that hit, I think it's 10 yards of organic waste a month or a week or something like that. So I don't know where the hanger falls, but we can look into that as well.
10 yards for a month is not a whole lot, as a side comment, but I think somehow that we should not be doing compost when in the same area where there are restaurants and where we can have cross contamination. So that's really in the weeds, but I'm a little concerned about that issue. I can just see the flies flying around the beer, you know.
Well, that's a state requirement coming down, so I don't know that we have
That's
much
good
say
to
at this
know.
point, but I think the intent is that, particularly, fast food restaurants and places that serve food, for instance, that are producing a lot of organic waste, they're going to landfills. We're trying to find a way to divert that from the landfill.
Oh, certainly,
Yeah, so that's what,
Do
so
it
I'm just saying,
cleanly.
so these high organic waste producers are going to be, I think their deadline's coming up pretty soon to start. So folks like the waste haulers will have to, figure out a way to provide them compost containers and start providing that service and picking up compost and whatnot, so.
I'm sure Derek's golf carts would be glad to pick up compost. We could outfit them with trailers. Okay, enough of that. Next, anything else? Okay, then let's move on to goal 7. That starts on page 11. There any comments on goal 7?
Nathan has a question.
Thank you. Oh, there you are, Commissioner Lutz.
I'll speak up next time. Yeah, policy 7.1.6. To me, I was having some trouble understanding what that was saying. That there was a lot going on there in that first sentence. Could we simplify that and just say increase the capacity and flexibility and overall reliability of the electricity grid in that first statement there?
Yes.
Yeah, just the last little portion, increase the capacity, flexibility, and overall reliability of the electricity grid.
Are you suggesting to take out the first part of the sentence too?
Yeah, I was just,
Okay.
I was having
see.
trouble kind of
Yeah.
understanding. There's a lot going on there. So maybe a more direct action phrase might help.
He's asking for a blue line modification, so the
Mhm.
paragraph makes more sense to the public reader.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think, and this might, could be suited better for implementation. But because Kenmore isn't the utility, that's why it's more about advocating. You'll have to coordinate with the utility to enable that capacity and flexibility. And, we've spoken to energy utilities and things like making zoning and kind of things that they need to expand lines or create like battery storage facilities. Those are the types of things that will increase capacity and flexibility in the electricity grid.
If that's the case, can we do something maybe
Yeah.
simpler that just says legislate for the increased capacity or regulate increased capacity and flexibility? Just something like that. So I'll leave it up to you in terms of which word you decide to choose. I think either way, it's going to get that point across.
Great. I put some real-time edits, but overall we'll say simplify and condense this.
I think we're on the same page there. Thank you.
We should be careful with regard to the first statement staff made, which is the electrical grid is not controlled by the city. So when you use the term legislate or provide regulations, there's only certain limits which we can ordain in the city.
I just chose those words because that's what was existing in that first statement, was advocate through regulations and through legislation. So I was just trying to simplify it down.
Okay, I just mentioned that. So we're going to do some blue lining on that.
Okay.
Is that good, Richard? Everyone, okay, blue line. Next item.
Actually, can we go? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm looking at just goal 7, and I'm having a hard time. It took me a while to kind of understand what it's trying to say. I think I'm hoping to simplify just the entire goal in itself, and perhaps maybe what I came up with: seek opportunities to implement climate risks into the planning of operations, into planning of city operations, and improve infrastructure resiliency to climate impacts. That last part, I'm having a hard time even kind of comprehending what it's trying to say. So if someone can kind of explain to me, I get what it's saying, but I think we should try to make that a little more simplified, is what I'm suggesting here. I'm trying to figure out how to put it as well. So once I have to figure it out, certainly let you guys know.
Great. So essentially what this goal is saying is to factor in climate risks into planning and improving infrastructure resilience to climate impacts. And I understand what you're saying. It could probably be wordsmith to read more easily.
Kind of like reading case law for me, but yeah.
So it could be something like increase climate resiliency of operations and city infrastructure or something like that.
Yeah. If I think of something, I'll reach out. But I am concerned about that goal in itself. I think it's difficult to read, and I think it's hard to comprehend for me at least. So. And so no motion yet, but once I figure.
Steve is about ready to talk. I mean, Richard, not Steve.
So, well, actually, Sammy had a good idea too. We could just remove seek opportunities to, and just say factor climate risks into the planning and operations.
Yeah.
And improve infrastructure resilience to climate impacts.
That makes a lot more sense to me. I think that would be a little more simplified there.
So what are you going to do? Say that again one more time. Richard.
We could just remove those first three words and it's just more of an action factor climate risks.
Yeah, factor climate risks into planning of operations and improve infrastructure resiliency to climate impacts. Yeah, that's an action. That's an act. I think that makes more sense for a goal.
Okay, then if there's no objection, we'll do that. Next item. I meant in 7, any other further? And Commissioner Lucis.
Yeah, really quickly on 7.1.8, I'm looking at the last part of that policy where it lists examples such as heat waves and flooding events. Could we also put and snow/windstorms? I know our community's been affected by that or is affected by that every couple of years or so. So
you're saying snowstorms?
Snow and windstorms, or
Oh,
snow/windstorms or something like that.
If there's no objection, that will be a red line amendment. Okay, next. There we are, Commissioner Anaziski.
I have a question about 7.1.10. It's address mobility inequities by designing accessible pedestrian facilities and implementing an Americans with Disabilities transition plan during transportation, parks, and other city infrastructure planning activities. I wondered if we just did the transportation element. So I'm remembering that something like that is in the transportation element. I hope I'm remembering correctly. And maybe also in the parks, recreation, and open spaces element, although I'm not sure because I haven't yet had a chance as a commissioner to look at that one. And if so, does it make sense to have it here as well? I could use some help tying it to climate, I guess, if we keep it here. I don't mind keeping it here. I'm just missing the tie to climate, especially if it's already in some of our other elements.
Commissioner Lucis, are you raising your hand on the same issue?
No, not on the same issue. Sorry about that. I'll lower my hand.
No, that's okay. You're next up after this issue's. We're looking for a staff comment on this, just so you know.
Well, I imagine that came up from John in your interviews, Nicole?
It's likely, yes. Yeah.
But we can look to see if this is being too repetitive, and if it is specifically addressed in the other element, we can remove that per your direction.
Or maybe John had a tie to climate in his mind, and maybe we can figure out from him what that was and make it more clear in this element if it's important for it to be here too.
I see what you're saying about strengthening the tie.
Yeah.
I think the reason it's put in here is because this is talking about updates to multimodal transportation options or expanding that. So just ensuring that it's also in line with this transition plan. Could be what he was getting at.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to remove it because it's an equity issue with the ADA accessibility. But I wouldn't want to remove it if it wasn't somewhere else as well. But also I wouldn't want to remove it if there's a specific reason to have it in the climate element that I'm just not seeing. Maybe I just need somebody to explain to me why it's there. Like I said, maybe John can do that.
So is staff going to look into this?
Yeah.
Thank you. So it's noted the staff will look into this and provide expert opinion back to the planning commission. So moving on, is there any further comments?
I've one final comment for this is Commissioner Qadri. I'm
Thank
looking
you.
at policy 7.1.3. We've specified a structure along 73rd Avenue Northeast between 182nd and 185th. Is that necessary to put in there to specify a certain structure? I've been in Kenmore for about maybe a year and a half, 2 years now. So is that an important structure that we need to include in there? Can we just remove that example of that structure? I guess it's a question before I make my motion.
Yeah, so this was provided in staff interviews as an example of, I think, repeated flooding to structures here. So I don't necessarily think it's an example, like you said. I don't think it necessarily needs to be in here.
Yeah, I'd make a motion to remove the portion where it says such as the structures along 73rd Avenue Northeast between 192nd and 185th. There might be several other structures that might be consistent as well. So I'd make a motion to remove that from
Second that. It's been moved and seconded, and on that, if I may take the privilege to comment, I completely agree that we should not call out specific properties in a planning element because it could be viewed as spot zoning. And that is a big no-no.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for saying that.
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Banczewski.
I know why those were brought up as an example because they are exposed to repetitive flooding. So I'm wondering if instead of calling out the structures along 73rd, if we could call out like the conditions under which we might purchase structures. I know it says along hazard prone areas, but perhaps it could be such as those exposed to repetitive flooding or there's that house on 522 that's built on that really steep slope and I'm always afraid it's going to like slide down the hill, like something like that. I don't know if that would address the concern about spot zoning. I'm open to
As long as we
discussion.
don't call a street at an intersection, that we don't want to do unless it's already in like a city plan to develop. Well, you know, like the new public works yard up north. Now, that would be different because we own that, but otherwise, would you like to just take a whack at this back at the office and come back to us with something?
I don't think there's any objection to just removing that. I think you've made good points.
Do
I
that.
think we can redline that, but the other suggestion to maybe provide examples of the actual types of losses, we could add repetitive losses such as those involving repetitive flooding, landslides, etc.
Okay, so would you go ahead and do we will, okay. It's been moved to strike the last clause on 7.1.3. Is there any objections? Hearing none, that is adopted. And now do we support the staff coming in with a blue line to replace it? Are there any objections? Okay, thank you very much. Oh,
No
Commissioner
objection.
Vanderling.
I'm fine with that. I just wanted to add a comment here. One of the things that comes to my mind is purchasing any property that was built into an area that probably should never have been built on. If it's subject to repetitive flooding, if it's in a dangerous area, I think what should our goal really be here? should it be to take that property out of the mix, or should it be to restore that property, return that property to a more useful use that is applicable to what this element is all about? So I would want to have something in here that was spoke to the purpose that we're trying to achieve here. So yes, if we identify areas that, for instance, are in a floodplain, that really ought to be natural areas or ought to be reworked in such a way as it protects the rest of the city from flooding, then that's something that we should do, and that's directly related to climate change, and this is going to get worse. So I think identifying those areas where we may need to make, and I think this probably leads up to some kind of zoning change to facilitate that. But I'd like to see this related to a purpose, particularly a purpose that supports our adjustment to expected climate change, and not just, oh, we're going to take a property and purchase it, and now what are we going to do? The houses are still there. Going to move people out of there? Is this an eminent domain type of situation? What are we really talking about? I think we need to be a little clearer about this.
Commissioner Benaziski.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. And I know that the city has been acquiring properties like that to restore them so they get added to, I know the properties along 73rd, they get added to the Swamp Creek wetland. And yeah, so I know that's something that the city is already doing, and we could just make that explicit that we're.
I think that would be wise.
So are we asking the staff to write a little bit more?
I think so. And what I'm suggesting here is we link this action to a purpose. Purpose here would be to mitigate current and future flooding, eliminate potential danger elsewhere in the city, to have an opportunity to restore natural habitat, areas that are more suited to that than they are to development. Those are my examples of that. City attorney may have some input on just how you would word that, but I think we need more than just we're going to buy property because it floods.
Okay, Commissioner Benaziski.
It does say there to protect structures from future damage, and I'm presuming that means not the structures that are flooding, but the structures around those that are flooding. I'm guessing that's what it is. That, you know, so what you acquire the property, you restore it so it functions ecologically as it's supposed to, and that in turn protects properties around it. I'm guessing that that's what it means. Maybe the whole thing could use some clarification. I'm hearing, Mike, that you're feeling that way. Yeah. And Richard and Sammy, you can tell me if I'm misunderstanding what the city has been doing, but that's my impression of why we've been doing that, specifically with those properties along 73rd.
Yeah, I just want to provide an opportunity to let you finish speaking, but you both are absolutely correct. That is what's implied here. And you are also correct that we should probably be more explicit. So we would only be purchasing properties that have repetitive losses with homes and whatnot on the property. We would only purchase those with the intent of removing any improvements on those properties and restoring those back to floodplain or wetlands or wherever they may be. And that's what we've done in this particular area, for instance, on 73rd, that's what we've done with all those properties.
Do we have any comments from our Zoom commissioners? That's a new term, Zoom commissioners.
I think I'm okay. Thank you.
That's right. Zoomer Lutzis has left us, I think. Okay, so, well, he's gone. He's zoomed back.
I was stepping away to get a glass of water. I apologize.
Okay. Okay, anything more? Commissioner Vanderleen.
Yes, in this particular time, I'd like to, following up on our earlier conversation, 7.1.9, I had a little trouble reading what our intent here. We want to ensure long-term investment in continued transportation system functions by prioritizing investments in climate vulnerable locations. So Are we going to like build roads
Mm.
where, which are vulnerable to, what exactly are we intending here? And what is the long-term return on investment? That whole section there just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm
Mhm.
sure it does in somebody's mind here, but
I think the intention here is more so like vulnerable populations where there's like climate vulnerabilities, and it would be like emergency like options to evacuate or transport out. But yeah, I agree. This could probably be strengthened or incorporated into a different goal. Because I think we also have an emergency management
that makes sense.
goal. I'm gonna,
And I'm sorry if I could step back, Chair, would you please clarify on the previous 713, was there direction for us to blue line and add that additional language, being more explicit?
You wanted more, us to suggest to be more explicit? Well,
We want him to do it.
We struck the last part and then we were
Right.
provide direction to add some language at the end of that sentence. And then we had the conversation about providing more, being more explicit on when and why we purchase properties and what we do with them. So I'm just clarifying, you did want us to come back and include more language on that last
yes,
topic.
that
Okay.
is correct. Okay, I'm sorry, I was a little dense on that. Okay, we're all set. Commissioner Benazinski.
Richard, since you brought that up, I'm thinking about the other property on 61st that I don't know that that was purchased for these same reasons, but it was an acquisition that protects environmentally sensitive area. Like there was no problem, but it does protect environmentally sensitive areas, I guess, from future development. And was in line with the city's priorities, both, I guess, for protecting the environment and for, being able to work more easily on the transportation goals on that corridor. So I don't know how that plays into how this policy gets edited, or if we want to think about those kinds of purchases separately or wrap them into one policy, or I'm brainstorming here with you.
Yeah, I don't think, once we revise this policy, I don't think it would hinder that type of acquisition, and I think it's still supported in other areas. I don't think maybe further on with some of the natural systems policies,
Right.
probably where we want to acquire land for restoration and
Oh, yeah, that
increasing
might
tree
be-
canopy
might
and
be
all that. I
coming
mean,
up, yeah.
it would probably fall under several different policies.
Okay, yeah, we have a lot of those coming up, don't we? Yeah.
If there's no further discussion on goal 7, we're going to move to goal 8. That's on page 12. Is there any discussion on goal 8?
This is Commissioner Cadre. I'm looking at the actual goal in itself. Again, trying to make this more aggressive, seek opportunities to eliminate and or reduce climate change. So I'm making a motion today to add eliminate under goal 8. So it'd say seek opportunities to eliminate and or reduce climate change impacts on the community is what my motion is at this point.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Commissioner Lutzis, are you wanting to talk on this item?
No, not this item. I was raising my hand for after.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, the amendment is adopted.
and just
Okay.
clarifying, it was eliminate or reduce climate impacts on the community.
Yes.
I would-
that's my
That's
understanding.
correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Lutzis, you're up.
Yeah, this is directed towards Richard, but this is on 8.1.1. And I was looking at urban heat resilience plans and strategies, and I saw some suggestions listed. Has your department considered paved or impervious surface alternatives. And my mind goes out to the Sammamish River Bridge. On one side, it's a lighter impervious material. On the other side, it's darker. And I know that the darkers typically absorb more heat. And I had also read an article about this city a while back who sealed their roadways with actually a lighter colored sealant and ended up reducing a lot of the residual heat that would come off the roadway in the surrounding buildings and everything. I was just curious, this is a question, but has your department entertained ideas like that or thought about that as a strategy to combat some of these threats from increased heat?
Well, the short answer is no, but I hope that once we have, dedicated climate action staff on the team, which fingers crossed is coming very, very soon, those are the types of things that we can start looking at and thinking about under this policy.
Okay, I didn't have any like motions or suggestions. This was a curiosity question and just putting something out there. So thank you, Richard. I appreciate it.
Further discussion, goal 8. Go ahead, Richard.
I just had one point, if we were done with the other parts of it, for consistency on the actual goal, Planning Commission seemed to like kind of removing that seek opportunities to have a more action-oriented goal like the previous one. Would you want something like that done here as well so that it just states eliminate or reduce climate change impacts on the community?
I would think we have no objection to that unless someone jumps in right now. There's no one jumping.
I would prefer that actually, and that's actually a great suggestion, and I would prefer that. No objection.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, last call, goal 8. So hearing none.
I have a comment. Sorry.
I'm sorry. It's there. Yeah, your closed caption has got you there.
Sorry about that.
No, that's nothing to be sorry about. Go ahead.
Yeah, really quickly on 8.1.3, I'm looking at the start of the second sentence where it says potentially reevaluate plans to ensure they align with 100% of US EPA national ambient air quality standards. Can we change that to just say ensure they align with 100% of US EPA national ambient air quality? I like that more. I'd rather prefer that our standards align with air quality standards rather than potentially. So.
Oh, so just strike the word potentially. Correct?
Strike to where it says ensure. So ensure plans align with 100%.
Great. Objections to that? Hearing none, it's adopted. Redliner. Okay, Commissioner Manazinski.
This is a question about policy 8.1.2. I am wondering if are unsheltered individuals considered to be part of frontline communities? I don't think about them that way, but I am not sure if how they're commonly thought about. If they're not, I'm wondering if we can add unsheltered individuals in there just to call them out. I feel like they need
a specific call out.
Yeah, it's like if it could read frontline communities, unsheltered individuals and areas. No, yeah, a specific call out to unsheltered individuals if they aren't considered to be a frontline community.
I can confirm this, but in the definition we're using, they would be.
Okay, that's great.
But if it's, you would want the specific call out because they're one of the most vulnerable populations. I could see that.
What would you like to do?
I think I would like to have them called out. I know they were later. I noticed they were later in a different policy. And so I would like for them to be called out.
There any objections?
I could just comment
Oh,
quickly for Nicole. Sammy just checked, and we have it defined in the cap, and they are not included, so we can make sure.
Okay.
they're called out.
Okay, so where are we?
Supporting that we should specifically call them out. So in the cap, there's frontline community is defined, and they are not included. So if we want them included, we'll make sure they're called out.
So the idea and motion is to include them. Is there any objection? Hearing none, it's adopted. That's a red liner. All right, anything more on goal 8? Goal 9, thank you. Vice Chair Vanderleen. Goal number 9, and that's still on the bottom of 12, and we get to flip the page.
Oh, actually, you're gonna hate me now, but I didn't realize you were going to 9 already. 8.2.
8.2.
I'm gonna jump on the more aggressive bandwagon here, which I think is important. Rather than incentivize retrofits and new buildings, I think this ought to be a code requirement. I think we ought to be requiring, what do you call it, remodels or retrofits and new buildings, that they be built sustainable to reduce blah, blah, blah. And then in the policies underneath it, follow up with stronger language here. I would say instead of in cooperation with King County, I would say it's more like in compliant with King County. 8.2.2, not develop, but modify design standards to integrate. And under 8.2.3, not encourage, but require new utility infrastructures.
Okay, first of all, is there any staff issues with that before we jump in?
Well, yeah, it gets a little tricky here. So the city has, the building code is handed down by the state, building and energy codes, and we don't have any authority to modify or change those. So I would just be careful with kind of what language we pick here. And Nicole, if you feel free to jump in, I imagine in your conversations with Samantha, you probably were careful in writing this section.
Yeah, I think we can look at opportunities to strengthen this objective. And we did talk with Samantha. I don't recall off the top of my head if she had a lot to say about this objective. But for example, I think we have developed or modified, because I don't know if there will be specific standards that need to be developed, or if we can modify existing standards. And then
I guess to save some time here,
yeah.
I understand that there's going to need to be some additional research to see just how far we could go with this. And I think what I would like to do is ask you to do that and see how we could move this out of, we're going to incentivize to, we're going to start to the extent that we can, either advocate for changes at the state level in coding, and to what extent can we make this a more rigid standard and expectation at the local level. But it's going to take you guys to research that and figure out where the limits are.
So what I believe Commissioner Vanderleen is asking for is a blue line along those that
Objective.
policy goal. Is there objection to that from the commission? Hearing none, that's what we'll do. So that's not a red line, that's a blue line. I'm so sorry. We're leaving you with a lot of work tonight, and I think we all recognize that and we all appreciate it. So is no further goal 8s. Every time I say that, someone pops up, So it's goal 9, and it's not you necessarily. Goal 9 is next up. Hearing, this is your last chance. Any discussion? Hearing none, we're going to move to goal 10.
This is Commissioner Codry. Again, this might be kind of a confrontational or, a big issue. Can we, in policy 10.1.1, can we remove historically marginalized groups? It could just make it marginalized groups. I know when we say historically, oftentimes we may be referring to people of color, but now we have other marginalized groups like the LGBTQ community. We have low income, we have prisoners who are marginalized now in today's time. So I would move to remove the term historically marginalized under policy 10.1.1. And that's my motion at this point.
Is there further discussion?
I am thinking about how even calling them marginalized groups is sort of othering and places them sort of vis-a-vis like the dominant group. Could we do something like encourage the involvement of underrepresented groups or groups whose voices have not traditionally been included or something like that?
Underserved, underrepresented. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
Okay, that's been suggested now from the commission. Are there any objections? Hearing none, we'll do that. That would be a red liner. You okay with that, Richard?
Yeah, if you could just repeat again, were you suggesting one or the other or both?
I would just suggest one that would be underrepresentative. I think you make a good point. Underserved or underrepresented is fine. I'm okay with either or. They mean the same thing, in my opinion. So yeah, underserved is okay. Is my motion. So I'm not sure if
But marginalized is out.
and historically was what I was.
Wow, I got that part. Okay.
Yeah.
So we are going to use underrepresented, is that correct?
I could do either.
I believe his suggestion was to use underserved. Is what was.
Okay.
All right.
Right. Commissioner Banazinski.
This is a comment on objective 10.1. Provide all community members an equitable opportunity to learn about climate impacts, influence policy decisions, and take actions to enhance community well-being and resilience. I love this. I love bringing our community in and giving meaningful opportunities to dialogue and be involved in important decisions. I particularly like influence policy decisions, and it makes me think about an ask that's been made by the community as the climate action plan was being developed to have a community climate task force. And I know the idea has not been embraced by council, but it could be a good way to include community members in policy decisions. I think that part of the reason it hasn't been embraced is because we do have a lot of commissions and so on, and it does create more staff work to have an additional one. But I just would love to continue the conversation about whether that could be a good way to allow community members to influence policy decisions. It's just more of a comment than a request for a change.
So we have agreed to move to underserved. That's a red liner. And if there's no further discussion on goal 10, And we are off and running to goal 11, still on page 13. 14. See no discussion. Last call, goal 12. That's on page 14. Any discussion on goal 12?
Chair Thompson.
Hi there, Commissioner Lutzis. I was just going to look up to you there.
In keeping with our theme for this evening with goal 12, can we make that a little more actionable and just say protect, conserve, and enhance water resources? You read my mind. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to strike those first 3 words. There's no objection. That'll be a red liner. Okay, is there any further items? Right, hearing none. I'm looking at the Zoomers and I don't see any active wishes there. So we're going to go to, dear, I'm going to keep my pages going. 15, page 15, goal 13, goal 13. Okay, Commissioner Benaziski.
I have something, a question about policy 13.2.1. I'm reading it out for people who may be listening at home. I don't know if that's entirely necessary. I guess they can see it on the screen. I won't read this one all. I am wondering why we've called out the Sammamish River. And it says other cities along the Sammamish River. I'm wondering why we've called that river system out alone. Is it because it's a main stem? Or maybe I'm just wondering what the thinking behind that is and whether or not we could include other, like maybe Swamp Creek as well. What I was thinking was making an edit like at the end of that clause and other cities along the Sammamish River and its tributaries.
Yeah, the thought here is because it's a main stem, but I don't see an issue with also adding and its tributaries.
Yeah, that would include Swamp Creek then being a tributary.
I'll just put this in before you and yeah.
The objections. Hearing none, we will make that a red line. Any other comments on goal 13, the lucky 13? Going once. Only go once, okay. And I don't see any more comments on goal 13. So we're off to goal 14. This is on page 16.
Chair Thompson.
Absolutely, Commissioner Lutzis.
Thank you. I'm trying not to be rude. But
That's impossible for you. I just, you know.
Well, thank you. So 14.1.1 kind of makes me a little uneasy. Tracy, I think you might see where I'm going with this. I'm not sure if you looked over this as well when it talks about zoning and allowed uses within and adjacent to critical areas. I might bring you in on this discussion. It just kind of made me a little uneasy, and maybe we want to discuss it a little bit more. I don't know how much we can do, but I would like to hear some of the other commissioners' points on this, and if I'm being reasonable with maybe my hesitancy in this idea of allowing uses in this regard. I know that we're kind of constrained, but maybe we can have a discussion on it.
Go ahead.
Are you asking specifically about allowed uses within the critical areas?
Yep, that's right on. You got it. That's exactly what I was hesitant about.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm with you. I mean, I would love a whole reconsideration of our whole conception of reasonable use exceptions. That just drive me up the wall.
I know.
Yeah, I don't know what bandwidth we have here.
Yeah.
Richard.
Yeah, I think we're limited to some of the zoning restrictions and laws that we have in the city. So I'm not sure if there's anything that we could potentially do to change that with this. But yeah, I'm with you.
Well, maybe it's good that we're considering climate change in our assessments of allowing those things. Maybe that would make us not allow them. No, I don't know.
But see, what's that zoning, the allowance, I'm missing that term. The reasonable, thank you very much. Reasonable use exemption is a court mandate. That's required of all cities and zoning. So are we talking about that, or are we talking about more like regular use and purposing?
Well, I guess I can speak first. And Nicole, I don't know if you had additional input on this particular one, but I don't think we're trying to address the issues that I know you're all referencing about the those land uses. I think what we're saying is that on top of everything, we also want to include a consideration for climate change on top of all the other issues going on. So if it was a floodplain or a wetland or a steep slope, in addition to the things already being considered, also it could be compounded by climate issues. So having those considered as well. And
I don't have anything to add. That sums it up, Richard.
Okay.
Actually, from a land use perspective, this paragraph actually does make some sense when it comes to zoning. Because we aren't talking about reasonable use exception. That's a whole other issue. So I guess we're going to move on. Okay, everyone's nodding. Any other items for goal 14? Commissioner Banaziski.
I'm wondering if the goal would be balance the need for development and growth with natural resource functions instead of the need of development and growth. And then on policy 14.1.3, I would love some clarification on what a clause in that policy means. It says use regulations, incentives, open space acquisition, or where these measures are not adequate, use low density zoning to protect floodplains, riparian corridors, high value wetlands, and unstable slopes from degradation. What does where these measures are not adequate mean?
I think it would be where regulations, incentives, and open space acquisition isn't impacting the development still occurring, or
It's not possible to use those
Okay.
regulations and incentives and open space acquisition to protect the
Mm.
critical areas. Is that what it means? And then we would go to low density zoning? Is that what it means?
And I can get back to you on exactly what these could be, and where this, yeah.
Okay.
But the
Well-
idea is low density zoning would be another tool.
Well, I do often think about our R1 residential zoning, which I think we changed the name of it. But the R1 zoning, I do often think about that as protective of like the Swamp Creek corridor and protective of our steep slopes, R4 being protective of steep slopes. Is that what this is getting at? I mean, I don't want to say it's protective of those things. It's as protective as we can be when allowing development there. Is that what this means, this policy, that phrase?
Yeah, and there could be wordsmithing if this is just not, doesn't sound correct or isn't consistent with
Uh-huh.
the policies as you understand them or as they are. Like if that wording just doesn't make sense and it should be all of these things instead of or. But I think as you said, so it sounds like R1 zoning is established already and does this for zoning around Swamp Creek,
Well,
or it could.
I think that's the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Commissioner Van Duyn.
Yeah, that same section. I think there's an important principle here. I think there's an important principle here that may get a little bit buried in the wordage. I think starting with use low density zoning to protect floodplains, riparian corridors, high value wetlands and unstable slopes from degradation due to climate change is by itself a policy.
Mhm.
I could see separating that out and then you doing the work you proposed to try and get a little more clarity on what the first clause is intended to do. But I think there's two different things there. And I think the second clause after the comma really is worth a policy in itself.
Further comments from commissioners?
Maybe I just need some further discussion because that actually makes me feel a little uneasy. So, but maybe that's not your intention, or I shouldn't be. But
Definitely not, but tell me why.
Yeah, I think it's because if we just had a policy saying that we should use low density zoning to protect these critical areas, then that makes it seem like development is protective of critical areas, when I'm not sure that it really is. I mean,
No,
yeah, go ahead.
I would agree with you. It
Yeah.
isn't, which is why I like to use low density zoning, which given our current zoning,
Mhm.
R1 through R4, that has built into it low density requirements and considerations. And to extend that to say that we would also and specifically to incorporate or to address climate change impacts is what this policy would do. So it takes what's already there and then expands it to say we need to recognize now when we're looking at these sensitive areas that low density zoning, which is already there, or maybe it changes elsewhere in the city where we begin to see more climate impacts that would require or would suggest that it needs to be low density or lower density impact zoning, that's what this policy would do.
Yeah, okay, so it's sort of making explicit the way I think about that R1 zoning
That's right.
and the R4 zoning,
Yes.
just calling it out, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
thank you.
that discussion was between Commissioner Banazinski and Commissioner Vanderleen for the record. Now, is there any ideas for changes anybody wants on 14?
Well,
I would maybe just basically repeat what I suggested before, is we take that second clause, break it out into a separate policy and have wording, and you guys could wordsmith this as you go along, but use low density zoning to protect floodplains, riparian corridors, high value wetlands, and unstable slopes from degradation due to climate change impacts.
Okay, is there any objection to that red line amendment? Hearing none.
Wait, it still makes me feel uneasy, but Richard wants to say something. I want to hear it. Maybe.
And this might be a question for Nicole as well. I think, I'm not sure if there was a couple edits. I remember seeing this one in the previous draft, but I think it's not just simply low density zoning. I think there's a couple other clarifications we can add. It's coupled with things like clustering, and for instance, the R1 along Swamp Creek, it had, yes, it's low density, but it also had additional things about allowing, build closer to 80th. We'll let you do more over here if you stay further away from the creek. So I think we're missing a couple more words with that low density zoning that we can come back and clarify.
So would you be willing to blue line that?
We could do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Commissioner Benaziski.
And I think I maybe would be a little bit more comfortable if it were paired with when regulations, incentives, open space acquisitions, or whatever are not possible.
And I think that's the.
Was that the idea? What do you think about that, Mike?
Idea.
Yeah, I'm not looking to make low density zoning the exclusive response here. But I think low density zoning is a tool that could be used to achieve what we want here. And I think that's worth calling out in a separate policy. Now, I think maybe we still need to have the original piece in its own policy fleshed out, as I think Richard is suggesting. That I think there are other tools, and maybe that's what we need to have here, something that delineates what those tools could be. Low density zoning is one of them, incentives, other things, regulation are other options. I just don't want to lose the concept that low density is really what we want to have in those areas. And I would anticipate that if climate change has the impact we're expecting it to have, regardless of how successful we are in our mitigation efforts, we're going to find additional sensitive areas. And we're going to need or want to or should be going back and looking at those and rethinking their density zoning. And I'm looking for a tool here that would say, okay, as a policy, we would do that.
Yeah, and potentially maybe what we could do to satisfy both is have this start off with protect floodplains, riparian, and then we could include a suite of different tools that should be employed to achieve that policy goal. So we've done that in some of the preceding or previous policies where we have a bigger policy kind of goal and then bullet different tools to implement that.
Thank you, that's helpful.
If I may, we've been talking about the TOD and all this other stuff over the last couple of years. And several of us have indicated that what we have in the back of our mind is that we put the density on 522 within right up with that. And that's why one of the reasons why we were feeling that we can do 85 feet, because what we wanted to do is bring that density that's being required from the county and the PSRC and put it along there where there is not the environmentally sensitive area. And we can take the density out of there and put it up front. You know, that's easier said than done from policy, but I think some of us have thought that's a numbers way to protect these areas, because, you know, even the state legislature is demanding us to cut out single family housing, and we don't, in certain areas of our environmentally sensitive spots, we really don't want to do that. And so how do, you know, that we haven't voiced our policy perspective that one of the climate action plans is to put more people in denser environmentally good buildings, and with all that types of stuff, with EV charging, all up where we can afford to put it. So I don't know how we can say that in here, that is, you know, I could just see this in 30 or 40 years from now. They're going to say, well, you just have to put in another 1,000 homes. And somebody looking around and say, wow, here's some developed properties that we can get closer to the environmentally sensitive areas. And I think that is of concern to us. Not to speak for the commissioner, but speaking for commission, but to speak about a couple of those of us have chatted, you know, from the dais for the time being.
Well, I'll chime in there, Dwight, just to make sure there isn't the impression that you're alone out here, because you're not. I'm concerned, and have stated earlier, that there seems to be an underlying assumption in this section and elsewhere in our comprehensive plan that density is a good thing for the environment. And there are ways, and if you look particularly in a macro sense, as it does in the Growth Management Act, maybe that's true. But density means more people. Density means more impervious surfaces. Density threatens, or it's going to challenge our canopy. You're going to have more intense transportation needs as a result of that. So I don't think that density in itself, in my opinion and everything that I've read, really leads to the conclusion that you're going to have a positive environmental impact by increasing density. I think all of the things that we've talked about or talking about in terms of reducing, eliminating greenhouse gases, or there are all of these things that could mitigate our energy use, could offset that. And to the extent that we are having a larger population, and we have population growth, and we need to accommodate that at some point, density is going to be necessary. But I don't like the assumption that by increasing the density of our population or the density of our development, that we're actually going to have a positive impact on the environment. I think quite the opposite is true. Now, things we can do to mitigate that, but by itself, density, I don't see as being a positive. And I worry in some of our sections we're actually call out some increased density as a tool to address climate change and the environmental impacts of that, because I don't think that's true. I think the other things we talk about are true and can have that effect. So that's, and that comes back to the pressure will be putting density where we don't have it today. And that would first threaten would be some of our natural areas. The natural areas themselves, as they said, there's a limited amount of those. As we have more people and a more dense population, the pressure on those is going to become greater just by the increase in density. So one of the things that I think we have to understand as we begin to develop a strategy to mitigate climate impact is understanding how density impacts and exacerbates those same climate effects. And what are our strategies, knowing that we have to be more dense? What are our strategies for mitigating that? And zoning, and there are things here that we can control, like zoning, like some of our other things that we've done to protect natural areas, how we budget our funding to preserve and expand natural areas. Those are things that are actually within the city's control. So I'll stop there, but I think that's what I'd like to see more of, and I don't see it coming through in this climate element today.
Is there any further comments from the commissioners? Okay, and Nicole, I just, based on, I'm sure you understand what my policy belief is. Is there any way to write that in somewhere? And I'd be glad if you say, are you kidding? But I thought I'd ask you, and because this is where it might need to be.
I think Richard and Sammy, I can work with them to work this in. We also, I think, in the more of the mitigation focused policies, we have land use planning goals and objectives that it could potentially go into as well, or be reflected there, but I don't know if that answers your question. But I think I would need to work with Richard and Sammy to reflect.
I think what we just trying to bring this back to the topic at hand. What's the goal here? So we're trying to balance development and growth of the natural resource functions, and in this policy, I think regardless of the density, it's stay out of the floodplain, stay out of the riparian corridor. I don't even think I need to get into the density argument. What we were saying here is use regulations, incentives, acquire the space. I don't really care if it's one giant house with 2 acres of mowed grass. That's just as damaging if you're in the floodplain as a 6-unit multifamily building, if it's also so. And I can appreciate some of your argument, but you're prefacing that with some assumptions that density means more impervious. That's not always true. That density means negative impacts, which, I mean, if done correctly is not true. If done incorrectly, you can have these negative impacts. But I think that what we're trying to do here is keep development out of, do what we can to keep development out of these already existing pristine natural resources so that they don't get developed, period. So what tools do we have in our belt to accomplish that? I think that, like I said, I'm not sure we meant to just throw low density zoning out, I think we need to expand on that a little bit, but that could be zoning could be one of the tools. And we can try and blue line that to come back and
I know we have to be careful how we state that.
Yeah, I think, Richard, thank you for that comment. And I think that actually hits on one of the reasons I feel uncomfortable with just having low density zoning as a standalone is protective of these floodplains, because it's not necessarily, because if these, large yards have lawns, like, and no trees in the riparian area, upland from the stream, like, that's not awesome. So thank you for saying that. And I'm happy to look at the blue line and come back around to this. I think we've probably discussed
Give it
it.
a shot.
Kind of,
And
yeah.
I'm aware that I think there's council members on the dais, not commissioners, council members, that would jump on some of that language because they're looking to, some of the members are looking to the density on 522 versus more density otherwhere. My particular beef is with that 85 unit condos that went up by the church on 68th, because they completely deforested a large piece of forested land, and I don't see anything that's going to replace the value of that forest that was cut down. But that's just my issue, and what I'm concerned about is seeing more of those and seeing less of the environment, especially our tree canopy. As an example, there are other examples. I don't mean to call that landowner out, but it's from a land use perspective, it's a good example. So anyway, so you agree that you're going to give that a shot between you and Nicole, and that I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Bennett.
I'd have just one more comment on goal 14, separate from the discussion that we've been having. I have long really desired for Kenmore to move, I mentioned this earlier in this conversation, toward a model of net ecological gain as opposed to no net loss when it comes to development. And I maybe that's better placed in a different element, like the one that addresses critical areas. But if there is a place for it in the climate element, I thought goal 14 might be a good spot for it, with a caveat that I don't know if we are allowed as a city to move toward that model ahead of a state mandate to do so. So I'm kind of bringing it up for conversation and discussion, and maybe it needs further research.
And yeah, we can look into that. And so would you be proposing that as a new policy in this goal, or in a modification of one of these policies?
I think probably a new policy. I didn't see where it would fit in any of the other ones, unless you all are seeing it differently.
Okay. Nothing more for goal 14. So we're on to 15. So
I don't want to, I know that's our last goal, but just referring or touching on net ecological gain is a policy pertaining to public developments or public projects potentially a good compromise when we're talking about applying net ecological gain, or would you want it to be for private as well?
And are you
For net ecological gain, referring to net ecological gain?
I think in order for it to work, it has to apply to all development. But I have to admit that I am tired and not thinking as sharply and as well as I was at the beginning of the meeting. So I might need to punt that one and think about it further myself.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you.
Okay, we're on 15. Page 16. And then I got to figure out my papers are in a disarray here.
This is Commissioner Cottery. A quick comment and I guess a motion as well. I'm looking at just the actual goal in itself, goal 15. It's a support the development of a resilient and green local economy. The fact that we're even talking about this today, and the fact that we have commission members like Mr. Penley and Mr. Thompson and the city of Kenmore, I would suggest that we change to support the continued growth of a resilient and green local economy as opposed to development. I think we're already working on this. I think Kenmore is already ahead of many, many more cities. So my motion is today for goal 15 to change that to support the continued growth of a resilient and green local economy, or support the growth or continued growth. Yeah, that's my motion actually. The continued growth of a resilient green local economy. So I would ask to move the development part, because we've already started the whole development process already. Now we want to grow this, and that's the most important thing. And I think we should consider changing that under goal 15 at this point. So that's my motion, if that made sense.
All right, further discussion on that? So are we have specific, did we
Yeah.
have specific?
So, yeah, so I would say my motion is to remove the development part and say support the continued growth of a resilient and green local economy, is what I'm saying. Instead of making it seem like they were developing at this point, we want it to grow. We already have things in motion where this economy is already green. We have EV charging stations around in Kenmore. These are things that we're already doing. So I would suggest that, the fact that we can put continued growth on there would be something that would be important for the community to see, as opposed to just developing from the beginning. So I hope that makes a little more sense. So I guess what I'm saying is to remove the development part and put down continued growth of a resilient and green local economy.
Okay, so I see a nodding of head from Nicole, so that's a good thing. Any further discussion? Hearing none, that's adopted. It's a red liner. I need to admit to something, and that is that I'm at the end of my paperwork on 15. Oh, there's another page over. No, 15
15 is the last goal.
is the last one.
Yeah.
There was 20, I think, in the
Yeah,
original
that's what
discussion, which.
I think I
was trying to
misspoke
think.
at the last meeting and said 20 just to scare you. And on that way, when we got to 15, you'd all be really pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, thank you.
I really thought I had lost it again. I get evicted from my position. Okay, so is there any further any further ideas on goal 15? Okay, I see nothing from the Zoomers. So
Then
are we, Mr. Sawyer, are we to where you want to be tonight?
yeah, that would be the end of our presentation. So as far as next steps, we will have the red and blue lined second draft for you uploaded a week before the May 16th meeting.
And I also wanted to flag for the commission that we have conducted an equity assessment of the goals or the objectives and accompanying policies. And those recommendations we're reviewing with city staff and will likely include in the blue line edits for that May 16th meeting, which you would get on the 9th.
Thank you very much.
Did the commission have any questions on what that was, or okay? But yeah, that'll be included.
All right. Is there anything for the good of the order? Oh, Commissioner Benedziski.
Yes, this is a wonderful work that we're doing and a wonderful element. And I hope that we will all continue to push our elected leaders to make the resources available that we need to do this work. That's just something that I really want us, I don't want to lose the thread of that. Like it's great to develop these policies and objectives, and then we need to act on them, and to act on them, we're going to need more resources.
I just wanted to personally thank Nicole as well. Thank you for taking your time every couple of weeks to spend until 9 o'clock now to to discuss all these things. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for your wonderful edits and suggestions, recommendations. We're looking forward to providing a revised version for your review.
On behalf of the commission, I think everyone here and as well as Nicole, we really appreciate your patience with us and willingness to listen and try to work something out that the planning commission as a whole can settle on, and that we think the public we'll hear from soon will be generally in approval of. And we've, over the last year or so, have been really working hard at doing that. And where we need to do is we compromise and make sense out of very difficult policies. I think we've had some very good accomplishments on a couple of these elements. Know that we do detailed work and it probably drives staff crazy. But the one thing you can know for sure is when we're done with this, we will be supportive of this, and we will make it very clear when we present it to the council, all the good work you folks have done, and we push hard once we've finished something. We talk to folks and we push these elements really hard, and I think we have some success. And if you want to be a commissioner, you know, we have an open seat.
I think that actually violates personnel policy. So
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to be.
Yeah, well, I just can't help it. You know, you could get on the other side of the dais and it would work. But anyway, or you can take Lori's out, like we said before, you could just retire and get work on your pension.
I don't know if I could work for Debbie. I mean, gee.
Yeah.
Oh, we're still live.
We're still.
I'm kidding, Debbie.
Okay, so hearing nothing good for the order anymore, and we've said our thank yous, so we'll be back, and it is a lot earlier than we were 2 weeks ago, so it's 9:13, and I call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. You guys have a good night.
Thank you.
Good work.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.